All right, we are live on Locked On Bucks as the trade deadline has come to an end. As expected, the Milwaukee Bucks do make a deal just in advance of the deadline. Was it enough? Was it quite the caliber of trade that Bucks fans expected or were hoping for? We will get into that. The acquisition of Patrick Beverly and another smaller move the Bucks made, what that could potentially mean. All that and plenty of your thoughts coming up on this trade deadline edition of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I am Justin Garcia. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network. She is Camille Davis. You can hear her on Locked On Bucks each and every day, but also on the Technical Foul podcast and the Carry the G in MKE podcast. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen and maybe your first and second listen in the case of today, each and every day, as we're free and available wherever you get your podcast, viewable on YouTube as well, as some of you are in there on the live show. Wherever you get your podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Camille, we expected a move would be made, and a move was in fact made. The Bucks, I guess, addressing the defense and acquire Patrick Beverly. So we'll get to the components of the trade and what to me made it really interesting. But Patrick Beverly in, Cameron Payne out. It seems like overwhelmingly there's positive reaction to this. Not that you've been negative, but it seemed like you weren't quite as positive as I was.
Yeah, I should say, I guess the best word is I'm not excited about it. Like, it's a move where when I think about it, like, it makes sense. So here's how I'm thinking about it. We now have Doc Rivers in, and Doc Rivers is somebody who we know historically is someone who has leaned on his vets and his guys, someone that he trusts. He goes with short playoff rotations. So that means I'm thinking like, okay, the Bucks are probably going to go a 7-8 man rotation with the Bucks in the playoffs. So Pat's still here. Pat Connaughton is still here. Bobby Portis is still here. Those two seem like two guys who are going to be in the playoff rotation, especially after hearing Doc talk about him trying to build up Pat Connaughton's confidence, so on and so forth. And before I heard that the other day before they played the last game, completely blanking in the moment.
Now I'm blanking on it to the Suns.
The Suns. It's been a long road trip. Yeah, after that Suns game, it was like, okay, that's interesting knowing that Pat Connaughton's name has been in trade discussions, that Doc is sitting here like, hey, really trying to build up PC's confidence. So that made me think, like, I wonder how expendable Pat Connaughton really is going to be for this Milwaukee Bucks team. So then you look at another area that Doc has talked about, which is the backup point guard position. And he's mentioned like, hey, the Bucks need, like he said it before he became the coach of the team, and he's mentioned like, hey, the Bucks need some additional point guard help. Campaign really enjoyed the energy, the vibes, one of the most interesting jump shots I've ever seen before myself. And, you know, the defense just wasn't his thing, and he wasn't getting consistent playing time. So you get rid of Cam and you bring in Pat Bev, who theoretically fits because he is a more defensive-oriented guard, and that is something that the Bucks have lacked with rolling out Dame, with rolling out Malik Beasley. You need a guard that is going to be more defensive-based. So, like, the fit of him, it makes sense. He's on an expiring contract, 35 years old. He's been playing well in Philly, and ironically enough, on the Pat Bev podcast that he went live with, once he found out that he was going to be getting traded, saying like, hey, like, I'm going to Milwaukee, and I think I was just playing too good in Philly. Like, I was playing too good. He kept saying that over and over and over. So, like, it all makes sense. But with all the news that has been around the Milwaukee Bucks heading into this trade deadline, all the different names that they were supposedly interested in, just coming back with Pat Bev felt like, man, that feels a little underwhelming to me, especially having to send out that other second, which is our lesser of second round picks. Need to say it's not the Portland second round pick, which holds more value, but knowing the Bucks don't have many assets as it is, and they had to give one of those assets out to get Pat Bev, to another guy on an expiring deal, just like Cam's on a 1-year deal. It just didn't move me as much, but like, I'm thinking it through and I get the fit. I get the fact that Pat has a relationship with Doc Rivers already. He knows how Doc wants to play, which should be helpful, not only for Pat or not Pat. Yeah, well, this Pat Bev coming on to the team, but also helping out his teammates and getting up to speed a bit about how Doc likes to do things. So I get it. It makes sense, but a little underwhelming for me.
It wasn't a major name, obviously, as we heard a lot of those names kicked around throughout the course of the week. Andrew Wiggins was one of the big ones. Grant Williams, we dove into that, and then you saw Grant Williams was included earlier today in the move that brought the Mavericks PJ Washington. So you knew, okay, well, this deal is kind of done. But we had seen a couple of those names, DeJounte Murray, that the Bucks had apparently kicked the tires on as well. And then we started to learn more and more. The Hawks making it known they're not trading DeJounte Murray. The Raptors said the same about Bruce Brown, which was another name the Bucks were, I don't know if it was seriously linked to, but Bucks fans certainly had that linking there. And it just, we were talking about it beforehand too. The more that the Bucks were linked to seemingly everybody, it just felt like this was the type of move that would be made of, well, I don't know. Usually when we've seen them make these moves, one thing has been pretty clear, and it's been very stealth. But the fact that there's been a lot of conjecture and, well, the Bucks are checking in on this player just led you to believe it was going to be a smaller scale move, which is what we saw. I think Patrick Beverly helps you a lot. And you mentioned this and went over his strengths as well. His familiarity with Doc Rivers, that dates back all the way to his days in LA with the Clippers, where Doc coached him there as well. And what he brings as well in terms of his defensive fit with this team. I've seen a few people point it out as well. In theory, you could play him with Damian Lillard, and that would at least give you the offense-defense combo. I think the only thing, and Patrick Beverly can defend up a bit, but the only thing is you'd have a very small backcourt in those minutes. You definitely couldn't do it with, we saw the Bucks try it a couple of times in the regular season. There was no chance you could play Cameron Payne and Damian Lillard together in the postseason. That would just be giving up too much defensively. So I like the fit it gives there. And the main point that you touched on, I was going to point out as well, but when we heard those comments from Doc Rivers about boosting Pat Connaughton's confidence, I know that was the name that was included in every one of these fake trades on the trade machine for Bucks fans. But the moment you heard that, you just kind of thought, I don't know if Doc Rivers is saying that. And granted, he doesn't have final say, but I don't know that Doc Rivers is saying that to the media if it's not a pretty good feeling within the organization of we're not moving Pat.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when I was like, okay, so now I'm trying to think, like, how does this change the equation? So hearing that made me, like I mentioned, say like, well, maybe Pat Connaughton isn't going to be as available, or the Bucks weren't interested in what the return could be for sending out Pat Connaughton and or Bobby Portis together. Like, that's another aspect of it. And when I was thinking of guys who the Bucks could bring in, when I was thinking of smaller guards that could defend, like Chris Dunn was the guy where I was, okay, if we're going to get another smaller guard, would love to get Chris Dunn in, especially seeing him up close and personal over the last week here against the Bucks.
Yeah,
but
couple weeks.
Yeah. And just seeing what he's been doing on the court, period. Like, he's had some games where he swung the momentum for the Jazz with his defense alone. And he's a little bit younger as well. Like, the Bucks are a veteran team. We've talked about that in age with this team. They've gotten older today as well by trading out Campaign and acquiring Patrick Beverly back in. So it seems like Doc's going to lean all the way in on the vets. But I mean, I guess one thing that I am looking to is Doc's been mentioning how he's going to need one of these young guys on this team to pop at some point. He said, we're going to need at least one. AJ Green's been the guy who's been getting minutes, but maybe now with a couple more, the trade deadline is done. They're getting ready to head into All-Star break. With some more time, maybe we do start to see a Marjan or an Andre Jackson Jr. Get back into the rotation, at least in the regular season.
Yeah, and look, I think this is another move that if I'm looking at guys, to me, it's a better sign for AJ Green, that you feel like the shooting that he gives you. We talked about it after a couple of the games on this road trip that I'm not going to sit here and say that AJ Green is an all-NBA defender or a very, very good defensive player, but I think we've seen some growth, and he's at least been a capable, willing defender in his recent stretch of play as well. And if you add Patrick Beverly defensively, that kind of buys you some of that time too, if he's going to take on some of those tougher assignments. We feel like AJ can hold his own, and maybe we can play these guys for some minutes together. I think the interesting part about Patrick Beverly is, everybody, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more comments starting to pour in as it started at the beginning of the show. But everybody a couple of weeks ago was clamoring when you talk about you want that dog and you know the name that's going to come up. It applies to Patrick Beverly as well. And you think about the spark that he's been for these teams. I'm not saying he's Bobby Portis, but there's a lot of that Bobby Portis where he's been an emotional leader. And I mean, you just think back to that play-in tournament game with the Timberwolves where Patrick Beverly is leading the charge in the celebration on the scorer's table because the Timberwolves won a play-in tournament game. That's the type of energy that Patrick Beverly is going to bring to the crowd. And I think it's going to be very similar to Bobby Portis in that the minutes that he is out there, especially on the home floor, there is going to be a connection with the fans. But I think there's a couple of larger picture things to examine here for the Bucks. You tiptoed around a couple of them, Camille. We do have to take a look at everything else that happened in the East as well, as it seemed like that's where all the moves came from, was the Eastern Conference. And it does kind of seem like on paper there was one clear winner. That was not the Bucks at this trade deadline today. So we'll get into all of that. And again, start to address all of your comments and your thoughts on the acquisition of Patrick Beverly. We will get to as well the other part of that deal, and that's Robin Lopez in a separate deal traded to the Sacramento Kings with some cash as well. So what that means for the Bucks, a couple of things, but we'll get into all of that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Player of the Week. And the name that pops to me is Paul Reed, as we've seen Joel Embiid still out, and especially in light of Patrick Beverly traded, Jaden Springer traded as well. Two players maybe not known for their offense or for playing the same position, but more going out for Philadelphia. Paul Reed has taken on a big piece of that offense with no Joel Embiid, and B-Ball Paul so far has been an elite fantasy ad. Josh Lloyd from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. It is no different with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. There's brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber and not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can find it as well on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports Today. It is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day, like an NBA trade deadline with all the local experts you've come to expect from Locked On, in addition to all of our national shows that cover every single league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. Camille, we'll get to some of the comments here and the thoughts that Bucks fans have of this move for Cameron Payne out, Patrick Beverly in. We did mention, though, and we'll get to the rest of the conference, but there was one other smaller deal that came in just before the deadline, and that was Robin Lopez and cash traded to the Sacramento Kings in just a money-saving move. So it does a couple of things. We'll get to that in just a second, but I don't know if you had a chance to see this. Robin Lopez himself addressed the trade already on social media and said, "I enjoyed being teammates with Patrick Beverly for all of an hour and 45 minutes. I'll never forget those times."
Robin Lopez going out in the most Robin Lopez way. I love it. I love the energy that Robin had. He had some dope custom kicks that he would always be wearing on the sideline. Really appreciated the Die Simpsons freaks that he had on recently. Every Simpsons fan should appreciate that. But it does seem like you mentioned, a cash saving move for the Milwaukee Bucks here. They send him out to Sacramento. He's expected to be waived by Sacramento as well. So it's a move that gets the Bucks roster down from 15 to 14 to make them somebody who can be active on the buyout market. Although it should be said that there are some names I've seen people mention, like, hey, could the Bucks possibly get Spencer Dinwiddie?
No.
And it's like, they can't.
The answer is no. Basically, for most, I would say 80% of players bought out. No, they can't.
Yeah, because he made too much money. He's over the MLE. So that's somebody who the Bucks could not pick up, but at least the Bucks have a little bit more flexibility with their roster. And I'm sure the ownership is happy to cut down on that tax bill just a bit by sending out Robin Lopez as well.
So one name that they could sign if he is bought out. Now, I'm going to preface with this. I don't think this player is going to be bought out, but we tiptoed around the name earlier, and that is PJ Tucker. That there was reporting weeks ago that the Washington Wizards was one of those teams that was looking at a deal for PJ Tucker. Basically, in a we'll take him and then we're going to buy him out and get some assets along the way. He would be eligible for the Bucks to sign on the buyout market because he is making just slightly less than the mid-level exception. And remember, that was part of the whole haggling with James Harden as well, which who knows what led to his exit and him being lied to, as he put it, in Philly. But that was part of it, was he took less so they could get PJ Tucker, and PJ Tucker in turn also took less. So he would be eligible should he get bought out by the Clippers for the Bucks to sign on the buyout market because of that. But I said I don't expect the Clippers would buy him out because it isn't just this year that he has left on his deal. There's more. So I don't expect that to happen. And literally just moments ago, Chris Haynes now tweeting, PJ Tucker will not request a buyout and will remain with the team for the duration of the season after trade attempts fell short. So he'll be a name to monitor in the offseason, certainly, but he's going to be 39 years old at that point. That it may just be for PJ Tucker. Maybe something happens, whether it's injury or what, where you get this opportunity. You got to make the most of it there because there is no other path at this point.
Yeah, there is. And the thing with it as well, like if the Bucks could have theoretically found a way to bring PJ Tucker back in, one, you're getting older again with PJ coming in, but I think about who's on the bench. I didn't even mention Jay Crowder earlier when I was talking about who would be in that Bucks playoff rotation. So you're thinking Jay Crowder, Pat Connaughton, Patrick Beverly, Bobby Portis. Those are probably your four. And then you're thinking about, okay, does PJ Tucker give you anything that any of those four can't give you? And like Jay Crowder, PJ Tucker, I kind of feel like you can get it doesn't move the needle for me. I guess that's the best way to say it, where it's like, it's a cool story. The narrative around it would be really cool, saying like, hey, look at him coming back to where he won a championship, a city that loves him, so on and so forth. But the actual on-court basketball fit of everything, like I just wouldn't see a pathway for a lot of playing time for PJ or a role for him to do something different for this team that they don't really already have on their bench. Like you can argue that he can be a better defender than what Jay Crowder gives you, but it's debatable.
Yeah, I mean, if you're making that argument, you're making that argument on Bobby Portis, really. If you're saying, where can we see an opportunity for PJ Tucker, it would be there with the second unit of, well, you could play him in those lineups where you have, instead of Giannis and Bobby on the floor, you have PJ and Giannis on the floor, and you're keeping Malik Beasley on the floor. And you feel like with Giannis, with Chris Middleton, who we're going to assume is healthy once you get to the postseason, but with Giannis and Chris and Dame and Beasley on the floor, that's more than enough offense to offset what PJ Tucker would have. But I think it really was just a nostalgia act at this point for Bucks fans, that you saw part of it was what the defense looked like early in the season. And you just remembered, the meme of staring at the picture of PJ Tucker, and you remembered what it was like and thought, well, it wouldn't look like this with PJ. But there's very, very minimal value that you would get from him at this point, given you've already got Jay Crowder. Maybe it's a different conversation if you don't have him. But
Yeah.
I think the big thing with PJ that we do have to stress is, and this is not to take him lightly or diminish him, but as a lot of people have pointed out as well in the comments, he's 38 years old. And, at some point, none of us are the guy that we were 3 years ago and 2 years ago. And especially at this level, once you get to that advanced age. So I think that was the interesting part. And look, the other part is the way the Clippers are playing too. Like if there was some value there, and if there was something where they felt like this fits what we want to do, especially a very, very switchable defense. When you look up and down at the way that roster is assembled, if he can't carve out time there and they just feel like we have better options outside of PJ Tucker, I think that's another thing that you have to really evaluate. Are we just clinging to 3 years ago and PJ on the stage chugging champagne and all of that? Is that what we're looking at this point?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, again, legendary performances from PJ on and off the court here in the city of Milwaukee, like that championship parade and all of the things that happened afterwards with him just being on Water Street, just chopping up with everybody. Like, love it for sure. But I just don't necessarily think that it had helped this team this year. But listen, the Bucks, I've seen in the comments a few times about Pat Bev being a dog, like understood. And I'm also aware of the fact that, hey, the Bucks have a lot of sense of urgency. We know that they're paying 3 coaches because of how urgent they feel the need is to pursue this championship window. And generally speaking, when you are pursuing championship windows, you are going to skew a bit older because you're piling your team up with vets who know what to do so that when you get to the playoffs and the rotation, so on and so forth, you can make the right decisions, play well, understand all of that. So that's where this current Bucks team is. And I think that's also part of why I know I have always been so interested in your Marjans and your Andre Jackson Juniors, to have a younger guy be able to get on the court with some more athleticism, a little bit more speed, so on and so forth. So, no PJ coming back, but I think that's fine. We got Pat Bev. It's going to be interesting watching him and Dame become teammates and friends with all of the beef that they've had from the bubble run to when Pat was in with the Lakers and all of that, the Cancun, we'll see you soon, and all of that good stuff. I love seeing Dame put out a statement just saying like, hey, we're going to move past that. We're teammates. Pat Bev was live on FaceTime with Malik Beasley talking about I got to fix my relationship with Dame and laughing. Yes. So, I think they're going to be professionals. They're going to play together. And you like having a guy with the energy that Pat Bev does have. Like, I do like that they have another guy with that edge on this team.
Was it also, was it Giannis or Thanasis that Pat Bev did the impersonation of earlier?
Giannis.
It was dead on. Yeah, dead Giannis, on too. So we're bringing that to the floor and can't wait for that first meeting. We mentioned this, assuming you have Chris Middleton once you get to that point. So we'll go through the latest on the injury report for tonight's game with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Speaking of Pat Bev, and again, no Pat Bev in this game, right. But possibly tomorrow when you play the Charlotte Hornets. So we'll get into all that, but also take a look at the rest of the moves made, because this deadline lacked star appeal. The biggest names moved, not what we've seen in years past at the deadline, but a very impactful trade deadline and really season so far up until the trade deadline for one team specifically. We'll get into that and to take a look at the rest of the Eastern Conference now following this trade deadline coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Well, time now to talk to you about Nissan and ask, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? If you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. There's the 2024 Nissan Rogue, perfect for city drivers and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built in, your always updated assistant to call on for almost anything. So gone are the days of connecting your phone. You've got Google Assistant now, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store, all built right into the 12.3-inch high-def touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Nissan Rogue, the perfect midsize crossover for your next example. It also includes the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder or the 2024 Armada. Will you change what you expect from a full-size SUV? Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. you can tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Nissan Armada. So take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. That team, Camille, that I mentioned, I think was, I suppose you could say, the clear winner at the trade deadline. And really just in combination with everything we've seen this team do in the last, 6 weeks, that is the New York Knicks, who made the biggest move of the day, arguably, and one of the first moves of the day, getting Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks from the Detroit Pistons. You add that to the mix with the already acquired OG Anunoby earlier in the season. They did send out Quentin Grimes, who was the apple of a lot of Bucks fans' eye, and another name that you wondered, could you possibly get him? But, I talked about being leery of the 76ers earlier in the season, well before Joel Embiid's latest injury. Here's the thing that makes you a little leery about the Knicks, not just this season, but the fact that in this deal for Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks, two guys that are going to help them in the postseason, they gave up no first-round draft picks. These were second-round picks, so they still have a number of first-round picks to use. They have Jalen Brunson. They have OG Anunoby, who they're presumably going to sign to an extension this summer, and they play at Madison Square Garden, the biggest media city in the world, a destination place for a lot of talent that they're going to be a team to keep an eye on in the offseason, not just what they do here, and they're playing very good, but have the Knicks all of a sudden entered the chat as one of the 2 or 3 elite teams in the East for the next couple of years now?
That's an interesting question, because I think that the Knicks got better. I think that the Knicks are better today after the trade deadline than what they were before. The fact that they were able to get OG, to get Bogdanovic, to get Alec Burks, like to get all that back without getting rid of any of your first round draft picks, like that's saying something. That's some good GMing that has been done over there in New York. And to win a championship, you need a few things to go your way. You got to have the talent. You got to have some injury health on your side and a little bit of luck as well. And with the way that this Knicks team is constructed, we saw already in Philly that Joel Embiid is out now with the torn meniscus. Like, looking at the teams, like, okay, well, now I expect for New York to be playing better than what Philly has been, because they're now missing Joel Embiid. Like, I don't know if I would pick the Knicks over like Boston straight up or anything like that to actually say they're a contending team, but they're right, to me, in my opinion, underneath that like elite contender team. But all that the Knicks would really need, and I shouldn't say need, but like an injury can change things really quickly. And if they stay healthy with the team that they have, I like what they have here. Getting Burks and getting Bogdanovic, like those are two guys who can create their own shots. They're plus 40% from the 3-point line. You're adding additional shooting out there with this team. It's just a good mix. Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo has been having a great year. And I know for some Bucks fans, they're like, they don't believe it. Like, I was on Twitter earlier with somebody talking about like, I can't believe like a contending team could have Dante DiVincenzo as a starting shooting guard. And it's like, well, I mean, he was starting for the Bucks before he got hurt, helped them build up the record that, got them into the postseason. Of course, him getting hurt opened the door for PJ Tucker to come in and start for this team. But Dante this year has been playing some excellent ball. So New York has built a very strong team. I don't think that they're in that elite contender status, but I think that they can be a tough out for anybody, and that if things break their way, they could make an appearance.
They could. And, you look at the way that their roster currently sits, a lot of it, and I think this is where the Bogdanovic move is especially big, is we still don't really know the status of Julius Randle. We know there was a separated shoulder, and the initial messaging was it's not the worst case scenario, which doesn't mean you're out of the woods. So we don't know what his status is going to be for late in the season. And Bogdanovic gives you a little bit of insurance there. And again, another name that the Bucks at one point were linked to, but all of a sudden they've assembled a roster full of guys that you can play in the postseason. And that was always kind of the thing about the Knicks in years past, where you knew they were a gritty team, the last 2 or 3 years, basically. You knew they were a gritty team and a team that defended and really embraced the messaging from Tom Thibodeau, but it was essentially Julius Randle, who had his issues in the postseason, and Jalen Brunson, and that was it. But now they've surrounded it with pieces that makes sense. And it's all just kind of added to this path to winning the Eastern Conference that I'm not going to say is as difficult as I remember, because you think back to even the year the Bucks won the title, it was very top heavy, but those top tier teams were very, very good. And I think the Celtics are still in that class, that the Celtics to me are still far and away at this moment the best team in the league. That does not mean they're going to win the title. That does not mean a team can't take them down in the postseason. It just means what we've seen and the versatility that they have here in the regular season, they have clearly been the best team that's out there. But it's not what we thought it would be of, well, you got the Bucks and the Celtics, maybe the Sixers can get to that level. And then you got a little bit of a drop off with teams that are better in the East. We've now seen it's the Celtics, then you have a drop off, and then you have, depending on what the status is of Joel Embiid, 5 teams, maybe 6, if you want to throw the Miami Heat in there as well, that you feel like, well, this team is certainly capable of winning a first-round series. And at this point, given some of the matchups, you got to put the Indiana Pacers in that category as well. So you're looking at the Cavs, who have, again, along with the Knicks, been the best team in the Eastern Conference for 6 weeks now. The Knicks that we just mentioned. Philly is still dangerous because there is still a possibility. What if everything goes well with Joel Embiid and he's back just in time for the playoffs? And that's potentially your first round matchup if you're the Bucks. So there are plenty of landmines out there. And for that point, I get some of the frustration. It does seem like overall the opinion of most fans that we've interacted with and seen in the chat so far is, in a vacuum, I like the deal. That I think Patrick Beverly is an upgrade over Campaign, especially a guy that you need to play in the postseason. But when I look at the rest of the Eastern Conference, was this enough? And, that's hard to answer. And in terms of the moves that we saw made at the deadline, when you look at the Celtics and what the Knicks did, the way the Cavs are playing, who was another team that stood pat, basically, I don't know if it's enough. I think it's clear the Bucks are saying, we like what we've seen, the numbers that you and I went over on the most recent show too, of the defense, even though it's a small sample size, we feel like this is trustworthy. And we think the Doc has started to change some things there. The move that we made to get Damian Lillard was for the playoffs to help our half-court offense, that we think with that and with the fact that our defense is going to continue to get better, we think that's enough. I don't know if it is, but I think that's clear. That's what the organization feels.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Friday. There's a part in it where Smokey's mom. Hey, listen, can't assume when Smokey's mom comes into the room and she gives him money to go to the store, and he's like, "This isn't enough," and she's like, "Well, make it enough." That's kind of what this trade deadline was a bit for me with John Horst, where it's like, "Hey, we're making calls, we're seeing what we can do. Pat Bev is the answer for this season, so like make this enough right now." And we've talked about the numbers and how the Bucks are trending. And one thing that gives you confidence is the fact that you have Giannis Antetokounmpo on your team. You have Damian Lillard on your team. In most series, like those are going to be 2 of the best guys on the court. Now, we need Dame to be a bit more consistent. We need Dame to, play a little bit better than he has been on a consistent level. But if he gets to that point, and when you pair that with Giannis, like you have 2 of the best players on the court in any series that you walk in, arguably. So that already is going for you. Love that aspect of it. And we mentioned the fact that Pat Bev does provide an upgrade over what Campaign can give you. So there's that as well. Like, I'm not sure if it's enough, but the Bucks are going to have to make it enough for this particular season. And it's a team that is going to have some of the same salary issues coming in this upcoming offseason, where it's like, I'm not exactly sure what moves you're going to be able to really make. We missed this trade deadline here, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the last time that the Bucks could aggregate salaries together.
Up until the league year starts. So you could.
So they have a little bit of room in the offseason until that date gets here. So like
draft night, yeah.
This is who they have. I mean, they can get somebody on the buyout market, but we know how the buyout market is. It's not going to give you, a star general. Is going to give you somebody who was in the right situation, gets bought out, they have a chance. So I'm not sure if there's anything on the buyout market that also takes you over the scales. So like, is this enough? Not sure, but the Bucks are going to have to make it enough this season, because this is what they have.
I don't think there's anything on the buyout market that's going to tip the scales. And especially again, as we laid out at the start of the show, the Bucks not every player is eligible for the Bucks. It's not just the Bucks, but any team that's in the second apron, you can't sign them on the buyout if you're in the second apron, any player that's making more than the mid-level. So that's taken out a lot of these names. Kyle Lowry, I would assume, is going to get bought out by the Charlotte Hornets. You can't sign him. And it does seem like, especially with that move, make a whole lot of sense for Philadelphia to get Kyle Lowry at the buyout. So I think this is pretty much it. As we pointed to the Robin Lopez trade, I think the big one there is it saved you, I think it was around $8 million in luxury tax payments. So I think that's really the impetus for that move is, all right, we looked around, we waited until the very last minute to see, is there anything that we can get with that second rounder of the Portland Trail Blazers this draft, which is essentially a fake first rounder. And you just didn't see either what you liked or you couldn't get anything for that price, that you then said, okay, we made one upgrade. Let's shed some of that huge luxury tax bill and save some money there. And look, if anything else opens up, we have a roster spot that if there's somebody that fits into those parameters, we could be active there on the buyout market. But as you pointed to as well, how many times, like Marvin Williams was the best case scenario on the buyout market, and that's very rare.
Yeah. And maybe they can get like a Bismack Biyombo. We saw him be productive during his time in Memphis this season. So like that's somebody who I would be interested in the Bucks picking up on the buyout market. But again, like, does that change the equation enough by adding somebody like Bismack Biyombo where you're like, oh, now I feel like the Bucks have jumped another tier and like they're the clear championship favorites? Like, I don't think it does. So for this team this season, for them to get to that championship, like they are going to have to adapt to Doc's system and hope that the early returns that we've been seeing on defense are going to be able to hold up, where they're going to be able to finish out the season somewhere in that, top 10, top 15 range of a defense, and find a way to help unlock that offense a little bit more. If you can get that offense clicking a bit better as well, like, yeah, you roll the ball out, and I like the Bucks' chances against anybody. I wouldn't go in and saying like they're a clear favorite, but I like their chances. And with the way that the league is set up right now, with so many different teams having talent, and with the field being somewhat open, like that's at this point like the best that you can hope for.
It was a very interesting day. As we'll just quickly do this assessment of the East, but it was an interesting day for the 76ers, especially when you look at all the moves, 3 or 4 moves total that the Philadelphia 76ers ended up making today. They sent Daniel House to the Pistons in basically a baseball style deal of, TBD, player to be named later or future compensation. We'll do that for Daniel House. The other under the radar one was they moved Furkan Korkmaz finally, after his initial trade request. Furkan Korkmaz gets moved to the Pacers along with Marcus Morris for Buddy Hield. So again, it gives you some shooting if you're the Pacers if you're the Sixers, and most importantly, no long-term money as he's only under contract through this season. So I think as we mentioned as well, it's safe to assume if Kyle Lowry does in fact get bought out, that's probably his primary choice is to go to Philadelphia, a Philadelphia native. And they could certainly use it now with no Pat Beverly. I know they had a campaign. But let's just assume that's where he ends up. So if Philly approaches this, moves some of their guys that weren't really going to play anyway in the postseason, and they end up getting Buddy Hield and Kyle Lowry, those moves, and again, the big if is Joel Embiid is back and healthy by the end of the season. Those moves with that in place, are they better than the Bucks given the move that the Bucks made today?
To me, I would still say no, and that might be my own personal bias towards Milwaukee at this point. I do like how Philly's been playing. Joel Embiid, when he's been healthy, has been outstanding. He's taken a leap. Without Embiid, he's seeing some different defensive coverages that have been affecting his ability to be as productive, but that's what you expect when you lose the reigning MVP on your team. The defense is going to key in on you next. So Philly is not a team where if we were matched up against them in a playoff series, where I'd be like, oh my gosh, like there's no chance the Bucks can win this series, or think that, Philly is that much stronger than what Milwaukee is. I think they're actually pretty even, but I would still lean towards Milwaukee, again, in part because of Giannis and the way that he's been able to play. I know Embiid's been awesome, but the Bucks have enough size, assuming Brook Lopez is also healthy, to try to combat that a bit. And Giannis has just historically played pretty well against Philly as well. I mean, that's a playoff series we've been hoping to see for some years. And the way that things are shaking out, this might be the year we actually see it.
Look, and I'm going to, I suppose, give the cop-out answer that I hate, but I'm with you. I would still put the Bucks ahead of the Sixers if for no other reason than I've seen Giannis and most of this group do it in the postseason, and that's the big knock. And plus, we're saying if Embiid is back, it's a big if, right? That I think Philly is clearly playing for down the road. The Knicks, all the moves that the Knicks made with the way that this roster looks, and again with what the Bucks did. But that Knicks roster now that suddenly is very, very interesting, where you've got Jalen Brunson playing at the level that he is. We mentioned the who knows on Julius Randle and his timeline, but now OG Anunoby, who'd also missed some time of late, but he has clearly made a big impact on this team. And now you add to it Bojan Bogdanovic, you had Josh Hart and Dante, as you mentioned, Alec Burks and his ability to knock down shots. Isaiah Hartenstein has really started to explode in the absence of Mitchell Robinson. And I don't think the door is shut on Mitchell Robinson making a return this season as well. So they've really reshaped their roster outside of Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, dating back to the deadline last year, completely built over or changed over. Are the Knicks in a better spot right now than the Bucks are?
Then the Bucks, I'd still say no, but they're in a better spot. It's like I was saying earlier, like the Knicks are going to be a really tough out. And if they come off to me as a team, if the Knicks are also healthy and you aren't bringing your A game, like they can they can win that series. Like they can do it. And that's how I feel about a lot of the comp in the East, where it's like a couple years ago where I'm like, oh, put Milwaukee up against anybody. Like it's easy. I'm going Milwaukee. And I still have faith in Milwaukee, again, in large part because of Giannis and what he's able to do on the court. But these are going to be close series. Like this is coming down to the wire, and looking at how these teams are stacking up, it makes that end of season standings even a bit more important to me, because I do not want to see the Bucks fall into a situation where they don't have home court and they're having to go to the Garden for a game 7 or whatever the case could be in a hypothetical series against this Knicks team. Like they're good. Like I like what they're building there. And I know some people say like the Knicks don't have the guy on their team, so they can't do it yet. Jalen Brunson is pretty good. And his style of play is a style that can give the Bucks some fits, as we've seen. Again, you bring in Pat Bev and hope that helps someone who you can put onto a Jalen Brunson. So the matchups are going to be fun. But overall, like I still think Milwaukee over New York, but I don't think it's like a wide gap in between these two teams as they're currently constructed.
I would assume we're going to say the Celtics are in a better spot than the Bucks are. So I'm not going to include them. But the last one is the Cavaliers. And again, similar to the Bucks made that move for Patrick Beverley, but Cleveland did nothing. And I suppose you could view it and say, well, their trade deadline moves were getting back Darius Garland and Mobley and Evan Mobley. That was basically their deadline move. So Cleveland stays pat. They've been red hot of late. And the Cavs are past the Bucks. I know we pointed to the other day of, well, they're tied, but Cleveland is 2 up on the Bucks in the loss column and now a game up in the standings. Have the Cavs moved past the Bucks with everything that happened at the deadline?
They're up. See, it's hard to move them like say like 1, 2, 3, 4. Like I would go Boston 1, and then there's like a tier where the Bucks are in there. Like it's Milwaukee, it's New York, it's Cleveland. And depending on how the series would shake out, like it could go either way. Like Cleveland is a team I know that this team as they're currently constructed with these guys, they haven't done it in the playoffs. We saw them flame out last year pretty quickly in a way that I didn't expect for them to do so. We saw them make a few different adjustments in the offseason, getting Max Strus in and doing things like that. And we've seen this team be able to take off without 2 key parts of their roster here. And now they're implementing them back in. So like they're going to be a threat. And with the way that the Bucks have been playing, we understand they're learning new systems, so on and so forth. Like they're going to have to get that together. A few more weeks where it's going to be like, okay, like we're impressed of how the process has been looking. We're going to need to start seeing some results pretty soon, because again, if the Bucks aren't the team with home court in a series against Cleveland, against New York, against Philly, like it makes it even tougher for them to come out of that. And I don't want to see the Bucks put in that position.
Yeah. I think, and this is not to take a cop-out answer, it's tough to assess all of the East, because I think right now the Celtics are going to win the regular season. I would be surprised at this point if Boston doesn't end up finishing with the 1 seed and do so by 5 or 6 games, right? But those other teams are just so close, and they're such different teams. Philadelphia is the ultimate wild card because of the health of Joel Embiid and whatever that means. Indiana, I think ordinarily you would throw in there. They're still 5 games back of the Bucks and the Knicks in the loss column, which it's a lot to make up with 30 games left, that you need somebody to really start to fall off a cliff with how they play. So I think it's these 4 teams that we're looking at, the Cavs, the Bucks, the Knicks, and the Sixers, to see who can win those first 2 spots there, the 2 and 3 seed, because those to me are the most important, Camille. It doesn't even matter if you're the 2 seed. We saw the Bucks win the title as a 3 seed. We saw what they did when they got to the 2 seed, and you have home court advantage. The 3 seed was where they won the championship from. We've seen it with the 1 seed as well. But to me, the big thing is just don't finish on that 4-5 line, because if you do, I'm going to mention it again, things would line up perfectly if he is healthy for Joel Embiid to return right around the time the playoffs start. I think Philadelphia is basically going to be locked into that 5 spot, given the fact that they're already 2 back of the Knicks and the Bucks in the loss column. Embiid's going to be out for at least a month, if not more. We talked about schedules that are left here. Philadelphia has the 11th most difficult schedule left in the entire league. The good news for the Bucks is that toughest schedule that we pointed to for a while, it's now slid down to 5th. So only the 5th toughest schedule that they have left. And I'm sure it might be 6th after tonight with one of those 2 games against the Timberwolves. But Philly still has a relatively difficult schedule. But the Knicks and the Cavs are closer to the middle of the pack. Celtics still have the easiest remaining schedule, or second easiest. So again, even more reason why they feel really good about where they're at. But given Philly's schedule and the Bucks versus what we see for the Cavs and the Knicks, I think Philly is probably locked into that 5 spot, which, long story short, makes it even more important to avoid the 4 because of that threat of what if Embiid comes back with the way that he's been playing. And it's not just, fearing Joel Embiid and what he would do, but what your path would then be of Philadelphia and Embiid in the first round, potentially. You win, you play the Celtics in the second round. You win, and you play one of these 2 teams we were just talking about, we would assume, of the Cavs and the Knicks, who have been playing incredible. So that, to me, is one of the more difficult paths I remember in recent years, because we mentioned that a couple of years ago, and even then, you caught the break again in the Hawks instead of the Sixers in the conference finals. That things have a way of happening, but you still don't want to put it to chance of, well, maybe somebody else can do the dirty work for us.
No, we're far past the days of the Eastern Conference getting the Eastern Conference jokes at this point. Like, I know you're looking at Philly in the 5 spot and saying, like, that's probably locked. But if there's some type of run that the Pacers or the Heat can go on once they get healthy and get acclimated, like, they could easily jump in there too. Like, the top 7 teams in the East are all good in my book. Like, you're looking at the Heat, who have had their injury problems so far this season. And as always, the Heat themselves, like, they're different in the playoffs every year. It feels like Jimmy Butler in particular, and that's a big driving force. So you can never count out the Miami Heat. The Pacers are getting acclimated. I know Tyrese Halliburton's been dealing with his injury and playing limited minutes and trying to get back as well, while they get used to having Siakam on the squad as well. They made a couple of moves today, so they're going to be getting implemented with one another. You have Philly, then you have the Knicks, you have us, you have Cleveland, you have the Celtics. Like, those are all very good teams. So it's not a situation where I'm going in feeling like, hey, it's easily going to be the Bucks. Like, the Bucks are going to have to really start showing some things to end out this regular season, finding the right rotations, getting crisp on defense, finding ways to unlock that offense continuously. They're going to have to be better. Like, the Bucks are going to have to be better if they want to come out of this conference. It's not an easy road. It's not at all.
2 games left with the Celtics. You still have a game with the Nuggets, which is next week. Still have 2 games left with the Thunder, 2 games left with the Timberwolves, and 2 games with the Clippers. So, I mean, of your remaining schedule of 31 games left, 7 are against teams that are tied for the top of the standings in the Western Conference or within a half game of the top of the standings. And you got, again, 3 between the Knicks and the Celtics on your schedule left as well, and Sixers. So like, that's what we mean when we talk about the challenges that the Bucks have, is all of those games that are left. It's not just a matter of, man, the Bucks have a consistent stretch of you're playing pretty good teams. No, it's 31 games left. And a lot of those games are against teams that are right at the top of their conference. So that's what makes this a very, very brutal stretch that the Bucks have been going through. Again, we pointed to the road trip, and it's good to be off the road. And thank God that came to an end at 1-4. But now you get a back-to-back starting tonight with the Timberwolves. The Hornets, as we mentioned on the last show, Camille, tomorrow's game is one that I would assume you have to circle as, with this stretch, we got to win this game. And same with next week, your final game before the All-Star break in Memphis against the Grizzlies. Who knows? You might be asked to play in that game. The way things have gone for the Grizzlies, that's another one that you have to look at and say, these 2 games are our tent poles. We have to win these 2. If we can get 2 of the other 3, great. But we got to get at least one of those other 3 to get 3 of these final 5 games going into the All-Star break, because of how difficult this stretch is. And the fact that it's not over, that the back half and the final few weeks of the regular season are just as tough.
Yeah. All I'm hoping for at this point, Justin, is just for this Bucks team to get healthy. The guys who have some nicks, like Chris Middleton we've talked about how important of a piece that he is for this Milwaukee Bucks team. And prior to him spraining his ankle against the Suns, like, he was playing some pretty good ball, looking good. He was being aggressive on defense. We saw that in the Dallas game where he didn't have the best night offensively, but he had some tough defensive assignments and he was making guys work. Not saying it's Chris Middleton defense that we saw years ago, but like, it's not as bad as it was looking while he was still recovering from his injuries, which was a positive for this team. So yeah, guys got to get healthy. I'm hoping, knocking on wood, that there aren't any other severe injuries for this team, that guys can be healthy, because they're going to need this team fully loaded, ready to go, to really try to make some noise going forward. And on top of that too, again, new coach, figuring out new systems, like, they need as many reps together as they can get, because we know practice time is limited. So in game is when they're going to get those chances to do that. So you're hoping that, guys stay healthy, get healthy, and that they're ready to go.
Not the most exciting deadline that Bucks fans had probably prepped themselves for when you saw some of those names that were starting to be kicked around. Not the most exciting. I do think it was an upgrade for the Bucks, as we went through, of Patrick Beverly versus Cameron Payne, for a number of reasons, but especially the defense. And nobody's suggesting that Patrick Beverly is going to start or play 30 minutes a game in the postseason, but he's a guy that can play in those spots. So in a vacuum, the Bucks did upgrade there. Was it enough? It's still TBD to see where they're at. But as we're going to continue to really hammer on here, Camille, 10th in defense since the coaching change was made. You're all the way up to 18th now overall with that recent stretch of play and how they're playing defensively. That's the big thing. And I would assume that's the confidence that John Horst and company had. Either it wasn't just we didn't see any moves we liked, or the asking price was too much, but also we have seen some clear signs of this team playing better. And I do think that's important to point out and not get lost in the shuffle. Is you're going to be able to tell in these next couple of days and weeks who is actually watching the team versus who is just looking at 1-4 on this road trip. And Doc Rivers, who knows where they'll be in the next 5 games. If Doc Rivers is 4-6 as head coach of the Bucks going into the break or something like that, you're going to be able to tell who's actually watching the games versus who's just looking at the standings and the box score, because this team has looked much better on the defensive end. Mm-hmm. And I think, to Doc's point, the big takeaway is, what we touched on earlier in the show and what we heard earlier in the week of building up some of that confidence in guys like a Pat Connaughton. Bobby Portis, I know wasn't mentioned, but maximizing that as well. And really the big thing is just maximizing Giannis and Damian Lillard offensively, because as we touched on how good the defense has been in those 8 games, The offense is not. And part of that is you didn't have Brooke Lopez for 3 of them. You had a game where you didn't have Brooke, Dame, or Chris. But the offense, that's where you're still ironing some things out with this new group. But that's the Bucks trade deadline, kind of as we mentioned for the Cavs. Of Doc Rivers was our biggest trade, and now we'll see how all that gets implemented with this team.
That's definitely a way to look at it. And the truth about this Bucks team is that they're a top-heavy team, right? So you're going to need Giannis, Dame, Chris, Brooke, and Beasley. You're going to need your starting 5 to be the guys that are really scoring the buckets, who are really providing the offense and unlocking things. And you're looking at your bench guys when they come in, like we mentioned, for them to not blow the lead, for them to be able to provide different looks defensively, for this team to be able to throw out depending on the matchup. So we understand how this team is going to have to function. So I'm going to say this for all the Locked On Bucks listeners who are looking at the bench points and everything like that as well, where they're like, hey, Bucks bench is still like, as if the Bucks aren't losing the lead, or the deficit isn't getting larger while the bench is in the game, for this Bucks team, that's going to be a win. And of course, come playoff time, the rotation is going to be shorter. You're going to see extended minutes for those top guys on this team. You're going to see more staggering of them with the bench. So like, things should look different in the playoffs, but like, that's the lens that I'm now looking at this team through, where it's like, I just need this bench to not blow the lead. I need to see what we can do defensively by having different different lineup combinations, and see what that looks like for these guys. Because again, we got to make it work. This is what we got. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make it enough.
So for today, as we start to wrap things up here, you have the Cavs, the Knicks, the Bucks, obviously, and the Pacers are all playing today. The Pacers and the Knicks have the most difficult of those games, but it's shifted to where you got to pay more attention to really the Knicks and the Cavs, more so than any other teams. But that's the group you're now focused on, versus earlier of, let's see if we can gain any ground on the Celtics. So a lot of those teams that are bunched up around you and the Bucks will all be playing tonight. For that Bucks game, the latest injury reports, Giannis is probable. So is Jay Crowder. Is Jay Crowder now? It's running. It's contagious. A left ankle sprain for Jay Crowder. Giannis probable as well. So that duo is probable. So is Brooke Lopez, who was upgraded from out to questionable last game, and now from questionable to probable. Cam Payne was also listed as probable on the most recent injury report, though that is now shifted to out. And the big ones, Chris Middleton is out. No surprise there, as again, the x-rays were negative, but he left in a walking boot and on crutches. And Damian Lillard also questionable for tonight's game, which was his status earlier in the day against the Suns before ultimately being ruled out. So it's a challenging game once more, and it might be another game where you're very shorthanded, especially if Dame can't go, as you won't have a true point guard available, even with Chris Middleton as the de facto backup point guard out.
Yeah, like it's tough. And then you trade Cam and he's not available. We heard Pat Bev on his podcast today get a phone call, and he's talking about, I'm flying out to Milwaukee at 9 p.m. tonight. Like, okay, like, when am I going to play? And he's like, Denver? Okay, so not sure if we can even expect to have Pat Bev available for the Bucks come Friday on the second night of the back-to-back against the Hornets. Definitely can't expect them tonight. And we saw what it looks like for this Bucks team when they're short offensive initiators. Like, I'll put it that way. I won't even say point guard, just offensive initiators for the squad. And it's going to be a lot on Giannis if he is able to go. If Dame's not able to go, you're probably going to see a lot of defensive attention around him. Let's keep in mind the Timberwolves are a top tier defensive team in the league. It's not going to be it wasn't going to be an easy matchup when they were healthy, and now they're going to be shorthanded again. It's going to be difficult, but it should be fun. I'm looking forward to watching Anthony Edwards live and in person here in Milwaukee tonight. So we'll see how it goes, but it's going to be a tough matchup for the Bucks.
Yeah, and all I would caution is all the Bucks fans that are frustrated that we're not seeing more of the young guys, specifically Marjan and Andre Jackson Jr. If there's no Dame tonight and we just get hit with point guard Pat and AJ Green playing the point, then it might be time to raise some eyebrows of what's going on here.
Especially because, again, I'm not saying Andre Jackson Jr. is a point guard. We haven't even seen him initiate the offense. But in college, we know at the very least that that's something that he's been comfortable doing. And he mentioned that part of his NBA transition has been getting used to being more of an off-ball player. So I don't know. If we don't see Andre Jackson Jr. Marjon with the team being short-staffed, like I don't know what to make of that at all at this point.
We shall see, but another very challenging one tonight with the Bucks and the Timberwolves. So hopefully when we reconvene, we're breaking down a Bucks win, a much needed Bucks win, as they've now dropped 2 in a row in that 1-4 road trip. And then night 2 of a back-to-back tomorrow against the Charlotte Hornets. 2 days off, and then another rough stretch back-to-back against the Nuggets and the Heat. And then the Memphis Grizzlies on the road to wrap up the first half of the season. But again, Patrick Beverly reportedly, I do have to add that caveat, Camille, reportedly acquired by the Bucks. And as he had said too, we won't see him tonight. Obviously, you got to go through the physicals and everything else. So it's Denver on Monday is the likely landing spot in terms of the debut for Patrick Beverly. So it may be another shorthanded Bucks group for the next couple of days as they navigate these choppy waters with the schedule in front of them. But a lot that we saw transpire around the Bucks in the standings, just not so much from the Bucks. Our big takeaways here, Camille, as we wrap it up, is the trades were basically for the Bucks, Doc Rivers. That's your big trade, and seeing the eyeball test and the numbers backing it up of this group looks a lot better defensively. We'll get into some of those numbers and specifically where they have looked different and better on the next show. But today was all about breaking down the trade deadline, the hope that the Bucks would have something major cooking up their sleeves. It was Patrick Beverly, which look, it's going to be an upgrade, but maybe not quite as much as Bucks fans were hoping for. Any final thoughts on any of that?
Just ready to see, now that we know who's going to be here, trade deadline is over. I'm interested in seeing if we see any differences in play with the Pat Connaughton, with the Bobby Portis. I know Bobby himself mentioned the fact that he hasn't heard anything about trade rumors and so on and so forth, while Pat Connaughton was a little bit more transparent about what he's been hearing and figuring, like, I can only control what I can control. But now both of those guys know they are Milwaukee Bucks. So if there was anything else going on in the background, the team is locked in. And now it's time to get to work.
It is time to get to work starting tonight with the Minnesota Timberwolves. So again, our next show will be the post game from that. And then we'll have to reconvene on our schedules, but maybe another live show over the weekend to recap, let's hope, back-to-back wins with those games against the Timberwolves and the Hornets. But thanks everybody for tuning in for the last hour as we try to get through the trade deadline and the latest on the Patrick Beverly acquisition, headed to Milwaukee for campaign here at this deadline. So another trade deadline where the Bucks do something, maybe not quite as much as we've seen in recent years, but another move was made. We'll check in again with the post-game show following the Bucks and the Timberwolves. For Camille, I'm Justin. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.